Your story begins here. Single Again with LFA&BARBS.
Hello, beautiful people. This is LFA, and welcome again to this wonderful Single Again with LFA&BARBS. And in the house today, of course, as usual, it's LFA&BARBS. We are Barb in the house, and we have our guest in the house as well. So, welcome, ladies. How are you doing?
Hi, ladies. Very well. How are you?
Yeah, so I said she's doing fine.
Yes.
Doing fine. So am I. Yeah.
Even if I'm not, I can't complain, right? I'm still here.
Oh, yeah.
Me, I'm overjoyed to be in January. I know it's the longest month, the most miserable month, and I always find myself, if I'm not actively saying it's joyous, it goes down. Because the last couple of days it's been snowing.
Really?
It suddenly turned so cold. It's freezing out. Yeah, so everybody's complaining. But hey, this is the UK. The weather is unpredictable. So I just don't know why we complain every time there's something unexpected. So in January doesn't help. 5 weeks after Christmas is long month, but hey.
I don't know if we can ever get used to the winter season, because every year people complain, oh, it's too cold. But you know something? I kind of check myself, because I am like, okay, if I'm complaining about cold and when it's hot, I am the one that will be like, hot.
Yeah, because I always say when it's cold, you can do something about it. You can wrap up warm. But when it's really hot,
But honestly, I have to say this is my favorite weather of all the
this is me, my Englishness coming in. Let's not talk about the weather. Let's leave it. Let's leave the weather out of our chat.
Let's leave the weather out. Today, people's. Okay, just in case you stumble upon this podcast, or you are listening to us again, or you decide to visit us again, this is LFA, Single Again with LFA&BARBS, and today we'll be talking about forgiveness. We started talking about it last week, and this week we are continuing. We didn't really go into it, we just, mentioned it, but today we are continuing. We'll talk about forgiveness in total. What is forgiveness? How can I forgive this woman or this man? How can I move on? Will my children forgive me? Will I forgive myself? How do I do that? How do I go about all of that wonderful stuff is what we'll be discussing today. And just like the weather, I know that our feelings and emotions fluctuate. It has not been as cold as it used to be, and I'm grateful for the rain. Some days it will be really cold, some it will be not, and that's the way our emotions is when we are single again. Some days I am happy, some days I am. This morning I was going to drop my son at school, and my son got out of the house and looked at the weather and said, "Mommy, why is the weather sad?"
Yes.
Because it was cloudy and gloomy. I was like, no, because it's about to start crying.
Don't go through that transition.
And honestly, that's the way our emotions are sometimes. Sometimes we're gloomy, and then we just ask ourselves, am I really going to forgive this person? Am I really going to forgive myself? But I remember the last time we talked, I did mention something that forgiveness starts with me. Yes. Sarah, I'm going to throw you under the bus. What is forgiveness? When you think of forgiveness and thinking of your journey and your process and what he did to you, how would you perceive forgiveness?
So I think forgiveness is, to make it very simple, forgiveness is to a point where when the same person that hurt you yesterday, day before yesterday, 2 years ago, 15 years ago, when you remember those things, or when those things happen to you, you are not triggered to go back to either depression, anxiety, or whatever mood it puts you in yesterday or 15 years ago. That is how I understand forgiveness. Letting go of the things that hurt you in the past. I'm glad you explaining to the kids about the weather with being sad, and when the sun is out, of course, it's the happy mood. We have to come to a point where we recognize we all go through that transition. It doesn't have to be divorce. Life itself changes every day.
Yes.
We have to recognize that it's a normal process. It's part of life.
It is.
We change us. We have kids. We change what? Apartments. We grow. We change clothing. So change is something that we can't just skip in life. It happens. But I think when it comes to the point where you've been bombarded left and right with emotional abuse, physical abuse, financial abuse, neglect, of course, we feel like, oh, me, oh my, that's the end of my life, and I can't move on anymore. So where do I go from here? Especially those of us who were married for so many years. And now we feel, well, I'm off the market. I'm turning 40, 50, 60. And now nobody wants me, or I can't have kids, or I can move. I think the last segment I mentioned that this is the time you go back to the drawing board and say, well, 50 years is gone. It doesn't matter if you consider it wasted, if you consider it however you want to term it. It's gone and there is nothing you can do about it.
Yes.
But do you want to stay there? You are at a crossroad. Do you want to cross, or you want to sit at a stoplight and wait to see if Jesus is going to fall from heaven? No, it's not. So what are you going to do? You have to move on. But how can you move on if you don't forgive?
Your story begins here. Single again. Single with LFA and Barbs.
I think I gave an example the last time. You can never receive with a closed fist. And so for you to be able to move on, for you to be able to do something new for yourself, you have to let go. So forgiveness is letting those things that's holding you back. I was reading something a couple of days ago. It says, forgiveness starts with you, but forgive your parents. Some of us, our parents did something, we feel our parents did something to us growing up. Some of us were mad. My mom thought this guy was going to be the best man for me, so he recommended, and now
you're on your own. Yeah.
There's a lot of people to forgive in the process.
So in the process, go back to the drawing board. Who do I need to forgive? Start from your parents. Maybe the child who, the way they brought you. I think on my podcast, you mentioned something the other time. Sometimes our upbringing. Some parents did what they could do best with whatever they had.
They can, yeah.
But as we grew up, we found out this influence, the trauma they caused us growing up. We ended up going into our relationship with whatever they transferred to us.
So it's so eye-opening that you mentioned our parents. That is something I would never think of, Barb. I don't know. It's something that I would never think of in the process of forgiving my parents. Like, I never thought of it because I never, it's like removing them from the equation. Like they're just not there.
Yeah.
But so, yeah.
It's important because that's what we were saying through the other time about perhaps in this position that we're in, maybe you need some therapy, you need some discussion. And if you have a good therapist, they will always start from your upbringing. They will always help you to review where you started and how you've got to here. So if there's a parental issue, because some of us may not necessarily even link it to the fact that my parent did the introduction. As far as I'm concerned, they had good intentions and they wanted what is best for me. So I may not even ever consider negative thoughts about them, but looking at it. But maybe let's bring some process into what forgiveness is and how forgiveness. And I think I've done a lot of reading, as I was saying, is in order not to plagiarize. I think if you're listening to us and you are at a place where you want to forgive, do some these days we have Google, so a lot of the ideas you can actually read it. May not be gospel to you, but it might point you in the right direction. Yes. My understanding fervently of forgiveness is not about anything that has happened. Let me just look at it as forgiveness is for my well-being, my positive, putting myself in a positive aura, because I have always seen that for me to forgive that person because I feel they offended me, I have no idea of knowing they even realized the extent of the hurt they gave me. So if I can forgive myself and I get into my space of well-being, then perhaps even that person is no longer in my thoughts, because they're always in my thought because I haven't forgiven myself and I'm blaming them. But if I thought, okay, even just something as simple as they insulted me, or like we were saying last time, the culturally how I was brought up to understand my role as a wife. I stepped into it. He didn't. My husband was Europeanized. He didn't ask for it, but as soon as I stepped into it, as I was brought up to do, he sat back and thought, "Oh, there's something good here." I read my newspaper every evening, and she will organize my life. Not feeling that he's burdening me with too much, because I have gone to work 9 to 5 and I've come home to continue, and probably he as a consultant hasn't had to travel for the whole week, but he will still call me in the office and say, "What's in the fridge for me to eat?" He's the one that so if I'm now saying this after 15 years, I've stepped out of it, I've wasted my life, but it's not a waste as far as I'm concerned.
It's not.
But how do I move on without stopping him, so that in the next relationship, should I go into another one, I'm actually going in as a clean slate? So it's a lot of processes to forgiveness. Understanding the psychology of it. What does it mean to you as a word itself? What would it do to you if you did forgive your person? Forgiveness doesn't mean you're going back to a better relationship with a person. No. If that happens, hooray. But that's not the purpose of it. It's for you to get your well-being, yourself sorted. And when you see that person that, put you down, you can hold your head up high, because they hold no power. Because otherwise, subconsciously, they're actually holding on to us.
Exactly. You're giving them power and authority if you don't forgive them.
Yes. So forgiveness is good. It's a good thing.
And I was discussing, of course, with one of the production crew this morning, and usually, Barb, you forgive me. Sometimes I send you chat messages at 4 a.m.
Well, your time is out of zone for me, so I don't even look at
the time I wake up. That's the time I wake up, and I'm like, okay, I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to do that before I get into the good and beautiful madness of the day, So we were talking about forgiveness, and I was on a podcast last Friday, and the podcast was like 2 hours long. We were talking, and she mentioned the fact of, you don't address him as X, you address him as, and to me, that is part of my forgiveness and moving on, because how can I address him as an X? Because it's actively in my life. Through the kids, I wake up every morning, and my daughter that looks so much like him will just poke his face on my face. So why would I call him an X? He's still there. And then we started talking about forgiveness, and we moved on to talking about forgiveness and forgetting. That's something else we'll talk about later on, And I am of the opinion, because I believe God never forgets.
That's true.
He remembers, but he chooses not to remember. He chooses to just let it. I have forgiven you. I've wiped off the blood. Anytime I want to recall it, and I, as a Christian, I see the blood of the Lamb, I overlook it, and I move on with it. So to me, honestly, that is, I think that is one grace I have. I wouldn't say it's easy to forgive, but I think that's something I do.
Talking about it as a grace, I was talking to my daughter about it, that how I easily forget things that are hurtful. And she said, "Oh, Mom, your therapist hasn't got there yet." I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "I do the same." But when we've read about it, and she's a psychotherapist herself, says when we've read about it really and got deeper, it's because of the element of trauma. You may have suffered as a child. And I had a fair bit of my own, that you may have suffered. As a child, apparently God helps you, compartmentalize certain things. So your way of defense or mechanism to deal with it is actually to let that negativity be put somewhere that is not beneficial. And we've grown up with it. So sometimes I start thinking, is it actually a good idea, a good thing? Or I need somebody to put me under another psychosis to remind me of all those hidden elements and bring it out for it to be dealt with. But yeah.
But it's free. It's free. You're able to just let it happen and let it go.
Yeah.
It's free because to me, of course, I've worked in the medical field before, so I know what stress does to the body.
Oh, yes.
The stress and the worryation that comes with holding grudges and all those things. So I can just imagine that, like Bob you mentioned, the person has even moved on.
Yes.
Some of our friends have even moved. They have spouses too. They've been married with boyfriend, girlfriend, and children.
And we're still holding on to it.
And you're still holding on to it. And so basically it's our own, we're harming ourselves. We're harming our own body. This is just toxic for us mentally. It's everything, physically, everything, even spiritually.
Because if we can throw in the element of trauma, what role does trauma has to play in forgiveness? Because it's just like Bob said, yes, there is an element of trauma in everything. You're traumatized, and as a psychotherapist, as a social worker, you know that for you to process trauma, you go through therapy. If you're working with a very good trauma-informed therapist, that will help you process the step, understanding the trauma, understanding how the trauma presents, understanding where you feel the trauma, understanding how to cope with the trauma. So what part does trauma, now we're going professional, what part does trauma has to play in our role of forgiveness?
Well, I think, like Sawa said, is having it out there to deal with it. The issue with trauma is, are you yourself ready to open it up? Reliving trauma is opening a can of worms. Sometimes the reason why we're never able to go and forgive it is because actually it's too painful to relive it. So if you're able to get help to relive it, I do mental health, and a lot of the psychosis is born out of experience of trauma.
Your story begins here. Single again. Single with LFA and Barbs.
Exactly.
So the brain, in dealing with it, if you haven't been able to actually, you have yourself in a happy pill mood, you get more depressed. And the deeper the depression, the worse your mental health. And if this trauma, it is so difficult to relive because it's never spoken about, it's never dealt with. And therefore what that leads to is it's a undealt with or submerged issue, and therefore you don't even get to a stage where you say it's time to forgive. So I think if we're looking at forgiveness from the perspective of trauma, then who's the victim? Who's the perpetrator? How is this being executed? Is it being, formally dealt with? Was it a criminal offense? Was it just, because a lot of the, yes, men have domestic violence as well as women.
Yeah. And I was, of course, we all know that one in every 6 male will be sexually abused.
Yeah.
One in every 4 men or boys. 1 in every 6 girls.
Yeah. So this is why I'm saying that, therefore, for us, if this is born out of domestic abuse, which aspect of it? If it's physical, the police are at your door, sharpish. But where is emotional, psychological, those meanings that you have an undue pressure to actually interpret to a third person. These are the sort of things that becomes an unearthed trauma. And because of that, you are depressed because you can't even bring yourself to explain to a third person, to another person. Because sometimes the guilt that we put on, like I said, I stepped into my marriage as a good African woman who's expected to do this and do that, to do that. He could have gone the other way. He would have taken so much advantage. It's become so much abuse. I can't explain it because he didn't ask me to do it. So if I'm doing it and then now he's seeing it as not the perfect way and using it to abuse me, I'll be too embarrassed because like last week, as Sarah was saying, everything that goes on in the home is a responsibility of the woman. And if I'm seen as I'm not being perfect wife, I'm too embarrassed. I'm too ashamed to talk about it. So I live with my pain. I think we have to be careful in when we're saying, let's talk about trauma. It is where we are as single again persons. And if it's traumatic, if it's born out of trauma, if you know there's pain but you can't explain it, get some counseling. Get yourself into a safe space. If that's not out of the way, there is no way you can forgive.
I think it made a very good point about labeling what it is.
Yes.
It's true. Sometimes it's hard for us to tell what exactly is. Why am I depressed? Why am I so anxious? Why am I so jumpy? Well, sometimes it has gone on for so long. We can't name it. We can't label it to tell what's going on with me now. You've had a medical issue for so long, and doctors are trying to find out what's causing it. They can't find what's wrong with you.
Yeah. So and that could be the unforgiveness, Samantha. Oh Lord, that word is very difficult.
Bring your big word.
It's semantic feelings. Semantic feelings because of we've held it on too much, and it's funny. It's not funny actually. It's really serious because unforgiveness can actually make you have heart disease.
It does.
It does. It's not can. It does. And I think some of these, to be honest, a lot of long-term illnesses, majority of it is born out of stress because the body mechanisms are the hormones that the hormones that comes through the body is mostly based on your emotions and your behavior. I'm not medical, so excuse me for not quoting, and I'm not plagiarizing, but I'm just saying that it's the feeling and how you behave. It leads to all of these things. Then, the doctor will say to you, I can give you the medicine, but if you're not able to do this and this and this and this and this, it's not going to help. Because you need to bring yourself into the space. And I think if we can label it, if we can you also know that in this state of your violence or trauma, there may have been an element that you were the perpetrator.
Exactly.
Do you accept responsibility? Are you able to say, but well, if he didn't do that, I wouldn't have done that. She didn't do that, I wouldn't have done that. When you get to that place, you should know that there is an element of actually self-actualization for you yourself to see, okay, yes, there's victimization, but which part of it that I need to actually say, oh, I'm sorry I did that. I'm sorry I caused that to the family. Now we are here. I have forgiven myself. I ask that you forgive me. Yes, the power is still with that person. But sometimes as soon as you actually acknowledge that, I have a part in this, I have a responsibility in it, it kind of spins them on their head because they didn't expect it.
Exactly.
So I think forgiveness is very powerful. It's a very
It is. And honestly, I want to believe that it starts with me.
It definitely
like
does.
Said, I have to get to a place where I forgive myself.
Yes.
And I remember when I first moved out, I was sitting right here. Every morning when I wake up at 4 a.m., I just lie down my bed and just sit down at the foot of my bed. And I was sitting right there and I cried.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Mine was the shower. So the children can't hear me.
Yeah, my kids were sleeping at that time, so they wouldn't hear my noise. And of course, good for me, the door in the room is just soundproof.
That's solid.
Yeah, and I cried. And I cried. Initially, I started blaming myself. Because all along I was blaming myself. Or maybe if I had stood my ground, maybe if I had done this, maybe if I hadn't, done this. And then I remember what my daughter told me. My daughter was like, "Mommy, this is the best decision you've ever taken. This is the best decision you took." I sat down there and it was like, something was just like, Omolola, it's not your fault. You did what you could and what you should do as a good wife. You did this, you did that, you did this, you did that, you did this. So you have to forgive yourself in order to forgive him, in order to let him move on and for you to move on. And I really, and because honestly, forgiveness, I would say, comes most of the time easy for me. That's just something I'll just
like, good. Yeah.
Most of the time. Now I can still be upset with you.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I haven't forgiven you.
But I don't hold anything. Yeah.
So I just sat down there and I started praying and asking God to forgive me and give me the grace to forgive myself, and to forgive all the foolishness and everything that I took, the parts that I played in it. Because like Barb said, it's not one-sided. It's on both sides. Yeah. So I had to come to that realization. And of course, with therapy, it really helped me. And having a good support system around that, making me see like, oh no, this was what you did. This was what you did. And you did good. And one of my friends would say, look, what you did, I would never, ever divide it into 100. I could not do 100 of everything you did in the marriage.
But you see, you find that for us as women, and I'm just speaking from a little bit of experience that I get, for us as women, coming to you to say that to you, to say that, oh, you did so much that I wouldn't do, is easier than saying, well, I saw you did this and you treated him like this and it was really nice. We will never tell you the actual truth. We only want to give you the easy bit that you may want to hear. That is why it comes on you as an individual to try to find a safe space to actually break down your situation and understand the parts that you have played in a role. You may have not done anything wrong completely, but they could also be
even enabling it.
Yes, but even enabling it is not so wrong.
This behavior.
Yeah, enabling it is not so wrong because you may have not known anything different. That's how you've enabled it. But where you're consciously doing something that you know is impacting on the other person and say, well, if they didn't treat me this way, I did that, I wouldn't have done that. Which means you knowingly were doing it. And when we get ourselves there, we have a better platform to actually move forward, you know. Because I think, sorry, Sarah, you come in.
No, go ahead.
Because I'm thinking in this process of relationship breakdown, let's not forget, some of our network are quite conscious of not being in the middle of it, siding with the right person, or siding with the wrong person. Or how do they keep themselves out of it? But when you were cozy and together, they were there with you all the time.
Yes.
But when it comes here, it becomes a very difficult situation for them. Consciously or unconsciously, and knowingly. Because I think when I want you to continue to be that friend that you were on the other side and tell me all the wrong things I did, I may have said, oh, that's not fair, I don't want to see you. But I will get to a place when I'll stop crying and think on the truths that you told me. But we lose connection, you know. It's very important that self-realization is sometimes all you have.
It is. So I'll let you make your point before I just make this point.
I think I was going to go back on what Bob said, having a safe place. I think when I started this mental health thing, I mentioned, the team was normalizing talks about mental health, especially us coming from Africa.
Yes.
I'll just use Ghana specifically.
Yeah.
And especially actually coming from a Christian home.
Yeah.
Divorce is something that's frowned upon.
Very much so.
For me coming out to even tell somebody that this is what I'm going through in my marriage alone was something difficult. Or even coming to tell, of course, when you tell your parents, go back and pray. Go back and pray. Maybe you're not humbling yourself.
Praying enough.
Yes, you're not humbling yourself too much. As a wife, this is what you're supposed to do. When your husband walks home, just sleep on the floor so he walks over you.
Oh, Lord.
So this is what we've been conditioned. So just imagine coming to the point where now the marriage wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Who do I go to?
There's nobody.
Yeah. Because right now when
can communicate.
She couldn't take a marriage.
No, you know? Oh, that's such a stigma, you know? Well, she couldn't. I mean, there has been times that I have asked myself that question.
Oh, if I was the one who had this man, or if I was the one I would have been here and I would have been there. Of course, people, as you said, the next people around us see different things. I tell people, it doesn't matter what's going on in your marriage. You make decisions that's best for you. I can never tell you to leave your relationship. I can never tell you what to do in your relationship.
Yeah.
Because from the outside, we see different things.
Very, very different.
It's a different story altogether.
Yeah.
So in Ghana, we have a proverb, you know your fire, you know how hot it is. So you make the decision, how you're going to use the fire, find the fire. And so I think the stigma that comes with it also sometimes
it doesn't help.
Also coming out to speak out. And so, and as you said, we can't come to a point of forgiveness if we are not able to voice out what we're going through. We are not able to label it and say, okay, this is what's causing my depression, or this is what's causing my anxiety. This is what's driving me crazy and I need help for it. Just because of that stigma, some people just saying, well, they wouldn't even leave the marriage. Regardless of what's going on, sometimes they'll stay in the marriage and just die in it. And so I know I'm taking this at a different place, but at the same time, it comes down to forgiving yourself. As Bob said, allowing yourself for some of these things to happen. Sometimes we say, when we come out of it, that's when we say, I knew better. Why did I say for him to treat me this way? Or why did I allow him to do this? And why did I allow him to do that? Well, now you learned that.
Yeah, it's done.
Now you learned it. What are you going to do in your next relationship if you choose to go into another one? So I think it's very important, as Bob said, finding a safe place. Sometimes the church is not the best place because you know they're going to judge you. You may be the next sermon on the pulpit next Sunday. But
I know, right? Hey, the joys.
Oh, Lord. It's funny we talked about the church, right? There was a lady that, of course, when it happened, we used to go to a church, but we stopped going during COVID, and I started going to another church, and he was going to a different church. And the lady, when she heard, she came, and this was in line with what Bab said earlier on, that, and the lady came and she was like, Sister Lola, what did you mean? What happened? Oh, if you were still in this church, it wouldn't happen. And I looked at her. I said, well, thank God I wasn't in that church, because I would still be going through fire and nobody would know what I'm going through underneath. It was very critical of me. She was like, well, I'm going to blame you because you allowed you enabled him. If I were you, I won't take that. If she is doing this, you have to just tell him no.
You just listen, it is.
Yeah, I found out that the outsiders are always the experts on your case. And when it comes to their own case, they are not an expert in it.
But it's easier, isn't it? It's easier to think on somebody else's issues whilst you kind of calm in your own self and trying to tell yourself you're in a better position. So I think it's unfortunate.
Folks, on this note, we will be drawing the curtain on this episode. We are going to continue because honestly, I still want us to talk on forgiving and forgetting. And then it's just so huge and broad. It's something we draw on for a minute. So, folks, again, this is Single Again with LFA and Barb. In the house, we have Sarah and Babs, and of course, LFA. Sarah is going to be on the next episode. But for right now, we have to draw the curtain. Unfortunately, nothing good lasts forever, right? So please like, share, subscribe, wherever your podcast. And listen to Single Again with LFA and Barb. Sarah has our own podcast too. When we come back for the next episode, Sarah will tell us about our podcast and where you can hear her and subscribe to our channel as well. On that note, Barb.
Your story begins here. Single Again with LFA and Barbs.